As I mentioned at the end of this film, more and more cameras are being put into the hands of Native Americans, and by that I mean people in Canada and the US, as we saw here, but also in Mexico, Guatemala, down in Brazil, down south into South America. And some important work is being done that way. The cameras used to speak out against issues, to hold their own position against governments and other kinds of activities within the countries. And I think it's partly because of the expense of making feature-length films that perhaps we don't see Native American films as much in countries which are not as wealthy as the United States.
Obviously, it's best in many ways for people who are living a life to be able to talk about their own life and not people from the outside to talk about it. And people from the outside talking about other people's experience often get it wrong, and that's a large part of what's going on in this film that they're bringing up, is how much in Hollywood they were representing people in a way that wasn't really right or fair or not the best thing to do. But you know, I'm a photographer, I do documentary work, I look at a lot of documentary work and appreciate documentary work. I see a lot of problems with all of us who go out in the world and make work about the other. But at the same time, wonder, is there value in still doing it, and how can we do it in a way that makes sense? And part of it is trying to just be conscious to the fact of that as a non-native person, or somebody looking at the other, we come from a privileged background, a place of privilege that maybe isn't really right or fair, and we don't really understand people's perspectives other than ourselves. And we look through a lens through our experience, our awareness, and the way that we were brought up and the opportunities we've had in life. So it's really hard to sit and look at somebody else's life who has really lived differently. And maybe one thing that we can talk about now, or at least I feel I can talk about, is just how important it is to become aware of the fact that when I go into somebody else's community, when I talk with somebody else about their life or try and represent them, that I am doing it through my experience and the lens that I see, not through theirs.
I grew up about 60 miles from Little Bighorn, and I grew up in a place, I grew up in Montana, very close to a lot of Indian reservations, and very conscious in a certain way of living on Indian land. And for most of my life, as I've studied American literature and developed a particular interest in the Western and in Native American literature, I've become more and more fascinated about how our narrative about the conquest of North America is actually largely a narrative about ourselves. It is a narrative about white America and what we want to think about ourselves and how we want to understand our history.
You can't look at a northern New England history or culture without including what some of its native influences are, including during times when Native people were largely assimilated and were not sort of culturally identified in a primary way as Native people. And so for me, that is sort of what's been fascinating, is to work with questions of assimilation and identity. And there is a sort of social history that I think you begin to approach in looking at how Native people have functioned in contemporary society. Even the film is mostly dealing with mythic Indians and notions around mythic Indians, and also is largely dealing with a national concept of the Indian. And I think that if we did develop more regional cinema, we would, through the experience of it, begin to understand our own history, our own Native culture, how it remains vibrant and how it has struggled and all these different things. So that's sort of what I've tried to do in the ways that I can. And I've enjoyed working with a lot of different Native actors in particular, but it's always quite illuminating.